Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the cigarette filter, what it is, what it does, the pollution it creates, and who should be held accountable. My name is Willow Najjar Anderson. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Public Health Law Center. We are a nationwide team of attorneys and policy analysts specializing in, among other things, the tobacco industry and climate justice. Our mission is achieving health through the power of law and policy. We do this through legal research, policy development, publications, trainings, and webinars. We don't lobby or litigate, but we do provide litigation support. Now, a bit about today. When I was talking with a friend about this webinar, the first thing he did was apologize and say, "I'm so sorry, Willow, for my 20s when I was throwing those things out the car window." We were in a small group of friends, and others began admitting one by one that they too had tossed more than a few cigarette butts out the window or left them smoldering on the concrete. But what happens when it isn't just one person or a group of friends or a city or a region or even a country, but almost the whole world? And what happens when it isn't once or twice or for a week or a year or a decade or decades, but for a century? What does that do to our planet? How much does it cost? Who should be held accountable? And how? Those are just a few of the questions we invite you to consider as you listen to today's presentation. Our first speaker today is Dr. Robert N. Proctor, author of Golden Holocaust: Origins of a Cigarette Catastrophe and the Case for Abolition, which includes a whole chapter all about the filter entitled Flim Flom Filter. Dr. Proctor earned his PhD in History of Science from Harvard University and is a professor of History of Science at Stanford. Next, you'll hear from Dr. Tom Novotny, professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at San Diego State University School of Public Health. He served as a CDC epidemiologist in the Office of Smoking and Health and as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services. He founded the Cigarette Butt Pollution Project and is co-director of the Center for Tobacco and the Environment. You may also be interested to know that his work is featured in a recent film, The Cigarette Butt Surfboard, a documentary using cigarette butts and surfing to build ocean mindfulness and stewardship. And then we get to hear from Adam Lindquist, Vice President of Baltimore Waterfront Partnership. He will tell us about Mr. Trash Wheel and how it's not just cleaning up the harbor, it's collecting data. Finally, you'll hear from two attorneys helping to lead this environmental litigation. Because the case is pending, there are some things they may not be able to address. That said, they can walk us through the complaint, what is being alleged, and share the current status of the litigation. Let me tell you a little bit about Roy Mason. He is of counsel at Milberg PLLC, a premier international law firm where he serves as co-chair of the firm's environmental department. He also serves on a board of nonprofit dedicated to using the law to improve the health of Chesapeake Bay. This is not Mr. Mason's first rodeo when it comes to taking on corporate defendants. One of his first cases was against the Delcon Shield on behalf of a woman who suffered a serious infection, and they won. He then began environmental litigation in the 1990s, including cases against power companies for coal ash exposure and against oil companies for direct exposure to natural gas and gasoline fumes. More recently, he's filed suit against Exxon, Chevron, and other carbon majors. Mr. Mason has worked closely with Zach Howerton for nearly 10 years. Mr. Howerton is a partner at Milberg. He graduated magna cum laude from Vermont Law School, where he served as an articles editor on the Law Review and was a clinician at the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic. Mr. Howerton also holds a Master's of Science in Ocean and Earth Sciences. After we hear from them, we'll have a brief question and answer. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as they come up. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Professor Proctor. Please welcome me in joining Professor Robert Proctor.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to give a bit of background on filters. And let me see that. In a sense, everything is about quantity. magnitude. Americans smoked about 30 trillion cigarettes since 1900. That's enough to make a continuous chain of cigarettes from the earth to the sun and back more than 5 times. And that's just in the United States. And if two of these had filters, and I put it in quotes because they're not really filters, they're more like plastic mouthpieces, and each weighed about a tenth of a gram, that would be 2 billion kilograms or 2 million metric tons of plasticized waste tossed onto the ground and into the waterways. But why did cigarette makers put filters on cigarettes in the first place? And let's go back in time and look at the three keys to the cigarette epidemic: mass production, mass marketing, and mass deception. Cigarettes used to be all rolled by hand by women and girls in little shops in Boston and New York. And then along comes Bonsack in the 1890s, invents an automatic cigarette rolling machine. And instead of 200 per day, this machine could roll 100,000 per day. And the new machines are hundreds of times even faster than these. Some of the modern machines can actually roll 20,000 cigarettes per minute. And so these are really huge production facilities, and that's one of the things that makes what we're talking about significant. So that's mass production, mass marketing. Cigarette makers invent baseball cards, they invent skywriting, they invent all kinds of different types of cigarettes through their genius of marketing: erotic cigarettes, life brand cigarettes, peace brand cigarettes, death brand cigarettes, sports branded cigarettes, cigarettes of joy, asthma cigarettes here, not recommended for children under 6, as you can see on the right there. Cigarettes for the breath conscious. I'm not sure why you wanted one nun in your pipe, but this brand gave you 3 nuns in your pipe. Racist brands, cigarettes for doctors, cigarettes to keep you thin, radioactive cigarettes with extra radium added to them, Marlboro cigarettes for sporting events, Nazi branded cigarettes, Sputnik brand cigarettes. That's Leica on the bottom left. That's a Soviet cigarettes, first dog in space. Labor cigarettes. You got snooty cigarettes. We've got Harvard brand cigarettes. We've got Princeton brand cigarettes. Got Stanford brand cigarettes. Berkeley brand cigarettes. Cigarettes for presidents. Presidents for cigarettes. We've got true branded cigarettes. We've got fictional cigarettes. Cigarettes for your dollhouse. Cigarette trick books from the magic-minded. Marlboro cookbook cigarettes. We've got cigarettes for the ladies, the little charms. Candy cigarettes where you can be just like daddy with these Harvard brand candy cigarettes. Barbie cigarettes. We've got Earth Day cigarettes, organic cigarettes, cigarettes as riddle. They'll light up a camel while you're waiting for the bus. So, weaving all these themes together: patriotism, nativism, naturalism, spiritualism, and most recently, environmental responsibility, as in the American Spirit cigarettes. And what we also know is there's been a long history of mass deception. So, we had mass production, mass marketing, and mass deception. The denial campaign that we're probably mostly familiar with: distraction science, destruction science, reassurance designs, including things like filters. And in a sense, the denial campaign can be, over the long century, periodized as denying personal harm to the smoker. That was called the main issue, the lung cancer and so forth. Denying social harm to the bystander through denying secondhand harm, but also denial of environmental harm, denial that there really is a litter problem or that can be solved simply by the individual. The conspiracy, we're talking about adjudicated racketeers. The conspiracy is formed at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan with themes of no proof of a hazard, open controversy. And right at that same time in the 1950s, you get the rise of new types of designs in which deception is built into the product itself. The rise of filters, low tars, menthol, all as part of this campaign of reassurance, which involved funding basically every university in the country, but also at least 25 Nobel laureates, by my count so far. Um, and all kinds of claims that really it's not so bad to smoke. Nicotine smoke is effective like exercise. Lung cancer is rare in bald men because it's really all about hormones. And you have basically 10 design reassurance frauds. You have toasting, which is really making the cigarette sugary so it's inhalable. Menthol, giving it that medicinal chill. King sizing, that tobacco is its own best filter, so you don't really need a filter. Low tars, ultralights, lights, and cigarettes advertised as natural, organic, or additive free, but the most important in a sense being filters. That's the one the most long-standing. So again, what types of filters are we talking about? In the 1950s, there were asbestos filters using actually blue croxidolite asbestos, the most deadly kind, in the filter of Kent. Charcoal filters, pure white filters made by bleaching and whitening agents. And that's going to be a theme I want to stress is that anything that goes into a filter comes out in form of waste as well. And we'll see there are many dozens of chemicals that have been added historically to cigarette filters. Filters, high fidelity, high filtration, bouncing off the stereo craze. Recessed filters, which also make apparently good hats. Space age filters with countless different types of plastic baffles. Water filters. The American Tobacco Company actually sold a Wilder filter in the same colors of its Terryton brand, the charcoal filtered brand. Candy ball filters, clickable with a burst of menthol. But why again did cigarette makers put filters on cigarettes? There's three main reasons. Cellulose acetate, the chief plasticized fiber that's used in filters, is cheaper than tobacco. It keeps the bits out of your mouth. And so in that sense, is much like a traditional long stem cigarette holder or even a water pipe. And it fooled smokers into thinking they were smoking safer. When in fact, deaths rose. If there had been harm from cigarettes, deaths would have, death and safety from filters, the death rate would have fallen, but it did not. So what did the cigarette makers actually know about filters? They knew from the beginning they did not make cigarettes any safer. Hanmer, head of research for the world's largest tobacco company, the American Tobacco Company, 1953, in one of these secret documents says that filters are purely a merchandising and sales promotion proposition. Myron Johnson at Philip Morris, 1966, talks about the illusion of filtration. Helmut Wacom, head of research at Philip Morris, talks about hi-fi cigarettes not really making a difference. People end up just smoking more and ending up with the same delivery. And so even with filters, the health effects had not really changed very much. Cigarette makers knew that filters were just gimmicks. The head of British American Tobacco in 1962 talks about gimmick cigarettes, notably the marketing of filter tip brands. Bill Dunn at Philip Morris in 1966, charcoal filters are an effective advertising gimmick. And again, there's many, many different kinds of gimmicks. Parliament had a recessed filter. Viceroy had a deep weave filter. Terryton had a dual filter. Lark had a triple filter. Philip Morris had a multi-filter and flush fluted filters. L&M had a gas trap filter. BAT had an hourglass filter. Rothmans had a cross filter. Brown and Williamson had a dual light filter and so forth. And other companies had spin filters, active filters, filters with plastic baffles, micropores, molecular sieves, and there are literally hundreds of these. The list could go on and on. But it's important to realize that filters have many additives above and beyond what you find in tobacco. There's the tow itself, the fibers, which is usually cellulose acetate or ethylene glycol. But to this has been added, as I've already mentioned, asbestos, charcoal, vermiculite, freebasing agents to augment the nicotine potency, polyvinyl acetate and polyvinyl alcohol to control moisture, silica gels, and numerous bleaching agents and things like oxides of zinc, titanium, aluminum, and magnesium, ion exchange resins, processing aids, inks for putting on, often a branding on the so-called filter, and dozens of other of different plasticizing agents, diacetyl, triacetyl, triartetraethylene glycol, carbo wax, and so forth. And this is somewhere around 6 to 9% of a filter's weight are these plasticizing additives. And keep in mind that everything that goes into a filter, any of these additives, goes out of the filter when it's tossed onto the ground. Okay. So you don't just have the tow, which is the fiber, which itself is made to look like cotton, a kind of snowy white, cottony product. Um, you have the plasticizer, which is added to bind the whole. You have the plug wrap to keep it all firm, and then the tipping to bond it to the cigarette itself. And filters are made to look like cork very often, which gives an appearance of naturalness and biodegradability, like you're just tossing a piece of bark onto the ground. But even though cellulose acetate, for example, starts off as wood pulp or cotton waste, doesn't mean it's natural to end up with. It doesn't mean it's biodegradable. And that's a very important point. Remember that there's a difference between a pine tree and the New York Times. Even oil is made from, natural, even plastic is made from natural oil typically. And so just because, however, it starts doesn't mean it's not manipulated, engineered, and certainly doesn't mean it's biodegradable. And cigarette makers knew they had a problem. There's 782 documents on environmental harm in the industry's documents. There's over 2,000 documents mentioning the litter problem. There's 14,000 documents mentioning the question of biodegradable or biodegradability. And there's nearly 20,000 just on filter additives. And as I mentioned, many, many compounds have been added to the filters. And one of the reasons this starts being a problem, and it really only starts being a problem for the industry in the 1970s, was they were afraid that litter would be used to encourage bans on public smoking. Litter would be used to increase taxes on cigarettes. And litter might actually force a product redesign. And the really big threat, kind of like Willow hinted at a little bit earlier, were the bottle bills that come into being in the 1970s. People used to just throw Coke bottles out of their window. And a lot of state laws start mandating deposits on bottles, fines for littering, and so forth. That was their fear, was that these bottle bills would be expanded to the broader litter problem. So litter becomes a key part of the social acceptability concern. This is where the conspiracy entities really start coalescing around organized programs to make sure that smoking remains socially acceptable. A big part of that is keeping people smoking in restaurants and smoking on airplanes and in office spaces. But it was also about litter. And this was connected to what they called their courtesy campaigns. And the everything is about appearances. They're trying to create the impression of responsible corporate citizens by funding a Gathering Butts campaign, but making sure that all attention is paid to the individual consumer and no attention to either the design of the cigarette or the behavior of the industry itself. It's as Tom says there, it's all very downstream thinking. The industry claimed that butt waste was just an annoyance, and they had done this also with secondhand smoke. Yeah, sure, it's like a baby crying or a body odor or loud music. It's annoying, but it's not a harm. And in the same kind of arguments were applied to litter. Litter was relatively unemployment. It may be annoying, but it's not a real problem. Okay, and this one of the entities that was involved in directing this was the SOSAS, the study of social acceptability of smoking. All of the companies are involved in these actions to maintain social ability, partly through defending the non-existence of a litter problem. And the whole point, as this one TI document says, Tobacco Institute document from 1979, the point is to maintain a low profile while working to exempt cigarettes from coverage of pending litter control legislations. And keep in mind that the cigarette conspiracy that we often talk about had three theaters of operation: the dangers of litigation, lawsuits, the dangers of regulation, and the dangers of public opinion turning against cigarettes from secondhand smoke or litter or anything else. Those three theaters, that's explicit in the Roper proposal of 1972 from the Tobacco Institute. And all of the companies started exploring biodegradability, the biodegradability problem, the litter problem. Lorillard talks about a core product need as being biodegradability. And they, as I mentioned, funded cleanup operations while blocking upstream solutions. The Keep America Beautiful is funded as a form of greenwashing. The Smokers Care campaign is lost. You have the Big Sweep waterway cleanup that's funded by some of the cigarette makers. They start trying to promote portable ashtrays, pocket ashtrays, combination lighters and ashtrays. And these are all individualized solutions to what they even declared was not really a problem, leaving the cigarette itself unchanged. And what we know, though, is that throughout this time, there were alternative designs to the plasticized filter. For example, basically all cigarettes prior to the 1950s, and in fact, leading cigarettes. So many of you may not know this, but from 1960 to 1966, the most widely smoked cigarette in the United States was an unfiltered cigarette. It's the Pall Mall. The advertisement was you could smoke either end. You're not smoking plastic on either end. And their claim also was that tobacco is its own best filter, which is actually the logic behind one of the alternatives, which would be if you had to make a filter, it could be made from a compressed tobacco rod, which would be biodegradable, or binders that will avoid the added toxicity of a plastic mouthpiece. That's, I think, one of the key things is to what extent does a plasticized filter add to the environmental harm? So, and there are other alternatives as well. All the companies claim to be able uh, to make biodegradable filters. This one is from the Howney website, which makes is one of the leading manufacturers of automatic cigarette rolling machines, and actually was one of the very first to make an automatic a rolling machine that could attach filters, and that was already in the 1940s and 1950s. So keep in mind then, coming to an end here, there's really three frames when we look at this environmental problem and the broader problem of the cigarette epidemic. There's the smoker, the cigarette, and the industry. Cigarette makers, on all of their issues, they want to focus on the individual smoker. They want to say everything is a matter of personal choice. If there's a litter problem, that's purely the problem of the individual smoker. They don't want our attention moved upstream to the cigarette or to the makers of cigarette, even though they, the cigarette makers, have a choice. They are the ones who make cigarettes in a certain way. They are the ones who make a defective product. And we have to remember that if we ever do manage to hold them accountable, it's because of choices they made. And we as public health scholars need to move upstream and realize that we're not talking about purely a set of individual choices. We need to reconstitute the injuriat. The industry's greatest strategies over the past centuries have been individuating the epidemic, saying it's all a matter of personal choice of the consumer, and invisibilizing their own role, both in the decisions they as corporate actors make to make a certain type of product and to invisibilize themselves as an agent. And the word we've coined for that is catarrhumatics, downstream thinking. The old public health story is we find all these people drowning in a river, we fish them out one by one, one by one. What we need to do is go upstream and find out who's pushing them into the river in the first place. So I'll end with that. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a terrific presentation, Robert. I always learn so much when I hear it more than once, especially. And you've covered a lot of important points. And I think what we're really focusing on here is not the health issues that certainly are a part of the reason why the cigarette butts came into, or rather cigarette filters came into popularity. But it's the increasing attention that the environmental issues now are part of the tobacco control, but also joined with environmentalism, especially when it's a product such as this that's so it's visible to so many people. It becomes not just to the smoker, but also to non-smokers who appreciate an intact environment and policymakers who are responsible for uh, holding, polluters accountable to their products that are pollutant. I just want to emphasize the market share issue that Dr. Proctor referred to. And this graph, I think, shows it very well from the 1920s on to the mid 90s when filtered cigarettes became increasingly important around the mid 50s with the health issues that became scary for smokers, but also for the industry, such that the filter became ubiquitous almost by the time of the mid 1990s, and unfiltered cigarettes became hardly visible anymore. They still are sold commercially. There's still a couple of brands, Chesterfield, I think, and Pall Mall, I think, yes. But 99.8% of the cigarettes sold in the United States are filtered. So that means billions and billions and billions, as you can see on the right side. And the anatomy of the filter, Dr. Proctor related this very well. But I think one of the other issues that is important to note is that the chemical components of the filter are manufactured by chemical companies, not by the tobacco industry necessarily. They're in partnership, of course, but they're familiar companies like Eastman, Dow, and others. There's about, I think, 6 companies that manufacture the cellulose acetates that's used for development of the filter tow around the world. And there's also, some other additives, as he mentioned, charcoal, flavor beads, et cetera, in some of the filters, but it's still predominantly the cellulose acetate plus the plasticizers that were mentioned. And the difference between cellulose and cellulose acetate is acetylation. This makes it into a plastic. Otherwise, it's basically a wood product without the acetylation. And that would also adds to the sort of potential harmful effects in the environment. There's 12 to 15,000 strands that form this tow, and it's, again, combined with a plasticizer. So when it comes to degradability of the current filters, there's some photodegradability if it's under, ultraviolet light or ideal environmental conditions. But I've just reviewed a paper that has been following filters in the laboratory in different environments, grassland, sand, and other kinds of aquatic environments. And there's a 10-year persistence of the filter. There's a rapid release of a lot of the chemicals that comes out in the short time after they're deposited, say, into an aquatic environment. But there's a persistent plastic waste that stays in the environment, and even as it degrades into small particles, microparticles, microfibers, it reforms into sort of little spherules of cellulose acetate microplastics that stay with us. And to a certain extent, and we don't understand this completely, the chemicals that are in the tobacco that are then filtered through or rather moved through the filter, adsorb into some of these microplastic particles and then are released later and through other sort of desorption processes. So there's still a lot that we are studying to see how the mechanics of this environmental pollution occurs at a more sub-filter level. No matter what, makes filters, because of the plastic, difficult to think about in terms of a recycling process. I'll mention this a little bit more later. But if you think about what happens to or how filters are collected, they're collected in small quantities, really. And in order to be able to manage these, one would have to consider all sorts of things, such as the hazards of the chemicals that are there that need to be handled, transported, stored, detoxified in some way. It's an enormously complicated proposition. So it's something that just shouldn't be even thought about as a solution. The other problem is the filter fallout. And, we know that these filter particles can end up in the lungs of smokers. It makes sense. But, what are these particles doing to other creatures, other environmental ecosystems, et cetera, that where they persist? I wanted to mention the ventilated filter, which is a smoke that's coming in, makes it a little easier to draw more deeply into the lungs. It's a tool, again, to sell cigarettes, makes it more palatable for smokers. And the machine measured tar and nicotine levels are reduced, but there's really no sense to making this any better at filtering things than the filter without the ventilation. It's, again, another fraudulent marketing tool. But it's used in the advertising, and now some of that is banned by some of the tobacco control regulations. The environmental burden of discarded cigarette butts is something that we're trying to get a handle on increasingly, but it's pretty hard to do that. There's no surveillance system of all the butts that are dumped in the environment. What we have are self-reports from people who you get asked questions on a survey, or there are people like me and others who run around looking at smokers to see whether or not they're tossing their butts and what the percentage of the time is that they're doing that. And so we have a range, I think, of discard. We don't know for sure how many, what the percentage is of every smoker's cigarettes that ends up being tossed into the environment. But even those that are tossed into an ashtray or into a butt waste bin that is sometimes found in urban areas, that ends up being transported someplace. Many times ashtrays that people carry around with them are just dumped onto the street or into the sewers. So it's not like they disappear if they go into the waste stream. They go into the waste stream and they go into landfills that become another site for basically the discard of the filter that has potential implications in terms of leaching of the chemicals out of the landfill. But certainly there's a lot of them, no matter what. The global cigarette sales in 2020 were 4.78 trillion. That doesn't include the illicit sales, which is like perhaps another 500 billion cigarettes. When you think about that, again, Dr. Proctor mentioned the 30 trillion that have been smoked here in the United States since filters were kind of, around in the 1920s, I think it was. That's, no matter what the number is, it's huge. It's in the trillions. So I revised sort of this estimate of 4.5 trillion that the WHO published several years ago into a range of between 1.58 to 3.6 trillion cigarettes that are potentially dumped into the environment based on self-reported and observable kind of behaviors. And that's an underestimate. We know that. And again, part of it is because this is based on the commercial sales that are reported and not the illicit sales, which are another big deal globally. And this produces microplastics at a burden of somewhere between 143,000 to 320,000 metric tons every year. And many of those microplastics are carrying the chemicals that the discarded waste products carry with them. So this environmental impact, how can we assess it? Well, I think the principle of cautionary principle is something we should take seriously. That means we don't have to have a sense of environmental damage to humans to be able to regulate this. What we have are a lot of indicators that there are adverse environmental effects. Each filter releases about 100 plastic microfibers a day in laboratory experiments. And we know that from, again, laboratory studies that it's toxic to a wide range of living creatures, from microscopic organisms to water fleas to frogs, worms, fish, mollusks. And it also has an effect on microbial communities. That is, if you were to toss this into a compost situation, there would be effects on that microbiome because of the nicotine, which is a pesticide, and other chemicals that have an effect on microbial activities. We know that they can contaminate soils and be incorporated into plants. Even in some studies have been done, again, controlled more in the laboratory than as in the natural environment. We do, however, know that they show up in urban runoff. For instance, in the San Francisco estuary, the Bay, where there was plastics detected in the runoff from the storm drain system, cellulose acetate was a predominant fiber. Now, what would end up being cellulose acetate in a situation of storm drain runoff? Well, cigarette butts are the main thing. The only other things that are really made out of cellulose acetate are rayon in clothing, eyeglasses, photographic film. It's very doubtful that much of that would end up in a storm drain compared to what would happen as a result of discarded cigarette butts. So there's also evidence for bioaccumulation in animals that may get into the food chain through the fact that they incorporate the chemicals, and we can detect cellular changes that indicate that this is becoming bioaccumulative. So, and there's evidence for toxicity of with accidental ingestion, animals, pets, and even humans. But the top 10 items picked up over the years of coastal cleanups is worth noting. And this is the case usually in just about any sort of cleanup campaign in a city, on the beaches that occurs. And the environmentalists give us these data. They go out every week or every month sometimes and pick up all of the trash and then enumerate it. And what they find is that over the last 30 years or so, the International Coastal Cleanup that's reported by Ocean Conservancy, it's about a third. And other studies in urban areas, it shows like 25%, 28% of all of the items picked up are cigarette butts. And that's over and over and over, which means that you can pick up all the butts you want, and it's not going to stop the source of that pollution. It means that pickups are not an answer. They are a way of giving us data and information about how much cigarette butt waste is out there, but they are not going to change the volume of that appreciably through cleaning them up. Something else has to be done in terms of thinking of upstream solutions, as Robert mentioned, related to product changes, perhaps. At any rate, we've been able to start to think about the economic costs of tobacco product waste, focusing on the environmental impacts again. And that looks at such things as manual cleanup costs, because even if it's volunteers that are going out there picking up stuff, you can translate it into the labor that's involved in that, the organizational studies, even the supplies that are used in doing this. So there are costs to manual cleanups borne by environmentalists, but also our environmental groups, but also manual cleanup costs for communities. And so we can model these as a result of cleanup costs in terms of street sweeping, manual cleanup costs in other forms, and translate that into a proportional cost of those cost elements that are attributable to tobacco product waste. Private sector cleanup costs I mentioned, voluntary groups, and also businesses, are oftentimes responsible for picking up their cleanup of their cigarette butts from, for instance, a restaurant environment. System costs are something we can look at as well, and that means waste management systems, things like storm drains, sewers, also waste management and the treatment of wastewater, landfill costs, and wastewater, or rather even drinking water systems have potential costs for cigarette butt waste. Prevention costs are another element. When you try to reduce cigarette butts and say on a beach and you ban the sale of smoking on the beach, there are costs to the signage, to the enforcement, to the implementation of the policy. There are costs to advocacy campaigns. There are costs to enforcement costs of trying to enforce litter laws that are violated through the deposition of cigarette butt waste. So there are costs all along the kind of continuum of tobacco use that can be estimated as due to the environmental burden of these filters. So, the tobacco industry, again, as Robert noted, it really has known about this issue for quite some time. And I think one really good example of this is when Philip Morris International launched Our World is Not an Ashtray, which means that they admit basically that they're causing trash that's worth, recognizing as a global ashtray problem. And but again, their response is really to shift this to individuals, to individuation, as Dr. Proctor mentioned. So even in their own surveys, they have found that a quarter of their customers report that they throw butts on the ground because they think it's the normal thing to do. It's normalized behavior. It's almost expected that you stomp on your cigarette butts to make sure that it doesn't cause fires. Uh, Most don't know that they're made of plastic, that they think that it's cotton. And so there's this rather substantial uh, knowledge gap, both for smokers, but for non-smokers and policymakers, et cetera. And they've partnered up with NGOs, environmental groups that are trying to address things like litter. And again, it provides us kind of a screen for them. It's greenwashing, basically. And they want to try to make littering somewhat unacceptable, but and that's fine. But at the same time, there's no uh, responsibility taken on their side. It's to nudge smokers to do the responsibility. All of these are downstream approaches. Downstream approaches will not work to reduce the burden that goes in, that is the stream, into the waste stream, as opposed to just picking things up. So again, biodegradable filters and recyclable filters are not a viable solution. The main reason is because so few cigarette butts can be picked up out of the trillions. Again, it's like 1 million a year from the coastal cleanup. And even if you go out and purposely do this, we've studied that here in San Diego and find that around storm drains, you would have to go back to pick up to make a measurable difference in the outflow of these filters. You'd have to do a cleanup every other day practically to actually reduce the quantity that it goes into the environment. And that's not going to ever work. So this requires, in terms of recycling, some extensive infrastructure, regulatory kind of concerns. And, who's going to want to buy this stuff? There's no product that's going to be that viable or interesting to people to use. It's not a circular economy possibility. Biodegradable filters have been studied, and they actually had a task force in the 2000s to try to come up with some sort of way of measuring biodegradability, and finding that it's just not going to be possible with the plastic that is used and continues to be used as the main filter component. They've been working with tech industries. There's a Green Butts that has this major technical achievement of a biodegradable filter that dissolves after a while. But even if you were to have something like that, there's chemicals that are going to be still leached into the environment without the plastic necessarily being part of it. So in conclusion, I just want to mention and just want to emphasize that cellulose acetate filters found on 99.8% of the cigarettes sold in this country are a source of widespread plastic toxic waste. There's a huge knowledge gap among everybody, from smokers to non-smokers to policymakers, about the function and the composition of commercial filters. It's a fraudulent marketing tool that facilitates smoking and probably discourages quitting, because they are trying to convince smokers that it does actually some filter offer protection. The linkage of environmental advocacy and tobacco control is becoming an effective strategy. And in California here, at least in Santa Cruz, the environmentalists, mainly along with the tobacco control community, succeeded in getting filters banned in the county of Santa Cruz, California, starting in 2027, as an upstream policy intervention that they hope will be something that can be adapted by others. I'll point to a resource at the bottom here. Is a tobacco product waste paper that we did for the Center for Tobacco and the Environment here at San Diego State University that has a number of resources that may be of use to anybody who's interested. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Dr. Novotny. That was fantastic. We will hear now from Mr. Lindquist when you are ready. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Really terrific presentations. Really appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, share that. So I'm the Vice President of the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore, and we are responsible for cleaning, maintaining, beautifying, promoting, and marketing the Baltimore waterfront. If you've ever been to Baltimore, you'll know that the Inner Harbor is really kind of the crown jewel of the city. It's got the National Aquarium here, and it's got many historic neighborhoods, and it's just a beautiful waterfront with a public promenade that goes like 8 miles around the waterfront uninterrupted. So people just love the water and love the harbor here in Baltimore. Our organization is what's known as a business improvement district. So we actually have funding from city government, but also from private properties that we use to beautify and enhance the waterfront district. So we spend about $1.8 million every year to clean up litter around the Baltimore Harbor and in the Baltimore Harbor, and around 55,000 hours of dedicated cleaning services, collecting about 780,000 pounds of trash and debris annually. So for us, this is a huge expense and a huge part of our budget. And ultimately, as we reduce the amount of litter ending up in our water and on our ground, we could actually reallocate things from our budget to do things like plant trees or build parks or promote the waterfront. Like, we have so many other things we would like to spend this money on, but instead we have to spend the money on cleaning up the water. And so one of the ways we've done that, which is kind of unique and innovative, is through a project we call Mr. Trash Wheel. So Mr. Trash Wheel is a large-scale floating trash interceptor that sits at the end of a stream that flows directly into the Inner Harbor. So it doesn't move around, it stays at the end of a stream, it's moored into place. And then it uses renewable energy, solar and hydropower, to basically pull trash and debris out of the water before it can get into the open water of the Baltimore Harbor. We've actually, Mr. Trash Wheel is in the Guinness Book of World Records for collecting the most floating debris removed by a trash interceptor in 1 month. So, we take our work very seriously, though the googly eyes do make us look a little silly. This is just a quick graphic of how the trash wheel works. You can see that there are these orange containment booms that funnel trash as it comes down the stream to the front of the device. And then the water current turns a giant water wheel, which can also be supplemented with solar power. Then that powers a system of rakes and a conveyor belt that pick trash up out of the water. The trash goes onto the conveyor belt and ends up in a dumpster in the back of the device that's sitting on a separate barge. So when the dumpster is full, we can go out there with a boat and change out the dumpster and keep right on picking up trash. About 90% of the trash that we collect is driven by rainwater. Baltimore has a separate sewer system from its storm drain system. So everything that flows into an alley or any trash in a gutter or in an alley or in a parking lot or on the sidewalk, when it rains, that's going to get washed into storm drains, which flow unfiltered into our streams and into the Baltimore Harbor. And there could be so much trash in the harbor historically that it looked like you could walk across the water on the garbage. So our organization, because we're responsible for beautifying the harbor, we invested in this new technology invented by a local man named John Kellett. And it was great at picking up trash, but we wanted to take it further because we didn't just want to be an end of pipe solution, right? We wanted to be part of an upstream solution. So the first thing we had to do was add googly eyes. So I actually built the first set of Mr. Trash Wheel's googly eyes. I love the googly eyes floating up my screen there. Thank you, whoever did that. I actually built the first set of Mr. Trash Wheel's googly eyes in my basement, and we added them to the device because it really made people fall in love with this technology and get really passionate about the work of cleaning up the Baltimore Harbor. And so Mr. Trash Wheel was installed in 2014. And since that time, we've installed 3 more trash wheels, Professor Trash Wheel, Captain Trash Wheel, and Gwenda, the Good Wheel of the West. and they sit around the Baltimore Harbor here and collect trash after it rains. And Mr. Trash Wheel and Gwenda sit at the end of major streams, so they collect the bulk of the trash. Both of their watersheds are about 60 square miles. And then Professor Trash Wheel has about a 2 square mile watershed, so it gets a lot less debris, kind of not as many like leaves and logs, but still gets a lot of litter. And Captain Trash Wheel has about a 1 square mile watershed. So we've got 4 trash wheels operating here. This is what it looks like after a large rain event. It can take us a day or two after a large storm to clear out all of the trash that comes down. You can see it's contained here by these booms and will be picked up over the couple days. Here's a quick time-lapse video of what you can see when Mr. Trash Wheel is operating. The trash kind of sorts itself, so the lightest stuff comes first, the heaviest stuff comes last. So you could get a lot of styrofoam and a lot of cigarette filters at the beginning of a storm, and then you get kind of logs and leaves at the tail end of a storm. And we have picked up about 14 million cigarette filters. It is by number the largest item that we collect by number. Followed closely by plastic bottles and then foam containers and plastic bags. And here is, let's see, I have a graph here that just shows that just by the count of the items of litter that we pick up, cigarette filters are 69% of what Mr. Trash Wheel pulls out of the Baltimore Harbor, followed again by plastic bottles and then foam containers. Now, I'm going to go into where we get those numbers from in just a second, but I wanted to also emphasize, again, by adding googly eyes and then putting Mr. Trash Wheel on Instagram. So if you're on this Instagram, please look up Mr. Trash Wheel and give us a like and a follow. We started sharing all of the weird things that we pulled out of the harbor, whether it be this creepy baby doll or this mattress or this guitar or this live python snake that was someone's like escaped pet. And by sharing all of the weird things that came out of the harbor on social media, we developed a real following amongst the people of Baltimore and the surrounding communities. People really fell in love with this character of Mr. Trash Wheel to the point where they're making birthday cakes. They're dressing up as trash wheels for Halloween. This kid had a functioning trash wheel conveyor belt for his Halloween costume so that you could place candy on his conveyor belt and it would take it back into his candy bag. We even have people getting Mr. Trash Wheel tattoos. So Mr. Trash Wheel permanently tattooed on their body, which is just when you run an environmental nonprofit, you don't imagine that one of your projects is going to end up getting tattooed by complete strangers. So it's been, and I just share this with you to show the kind of passion that Mr. Trash Wheel's kind of become a mascot for the cleanup and the restoration of the Baltimore Harbor. And also we've used that popularity to help fund our work. So there's Mr. Trash Wheel stuffed animals and t-shirts and sweatshirts. And there's actually a craft beer for Mr. Trash Wheel as well. So that's kind of the Mr. Trash Wheel phenomenon. So when you've got all of these followers who are so passionate about your work, they're really looking for ways to get engaged. So each year we host an event called the Mr. Trash Wheel Dumpster Dive, where we will pull one dumpster out of the harbor, take it to a warehouse, and we will take, it probably takes about 100, 150 volunteers, 3 to 4 hours to sort and count every single item in a single Mr. Trash Wheel dumpster. And as you can see, so we'll have a table labeled tobacco products where we are counting every single cigarette butt and these little cigar tips here. And you know, the feedback we get from our volunteers at these events is that they are not really even capable of counting every single cigarette filter. They count and they count and they count, but honestly, they'll come up to me and say, look, you know, I did the best I could, but at the end of the event, I couldn't get every single cigarette filter. There was always more. So we know that there are, just thousands and thousands of these going into the harbor every time that it rains. So we've also used this data and our photos and really honestly the popularity of Mr. Trash Wheel, because he has a lot of kind of political clout too, because everybody has such good feelings about this project, politicians want to be associated with it and listen when they hear Mr. Trash Wheel mentioned in a hearing. So we actually helped the state of Maryland become the first state in the country to ban foam takeout containers. And we helped Baltimore ban plastic bags as well. And then we actually can use the data we get from Mr. Trash Wheel to show the impact of this legislation. So we've seen a 90% drop in the number of foam containers collected by Mr. Trash Wheel, a 72% reduction in plastic bags. And, you know, ultimately, we would like to see that kind of reduction in cigarette litter as well. So we're really excited to be a part of this panel and this case, this kind of first of its kind lawsuit that would help fund more cleanup around cigarette litter, because it is such, I mean, I've always said it's the one, no matter how much everybody thinks they don't litter, like you go outside and you can see, go outside for 5 minutes and you see multiple people throwing cigarette butts on the ground. It's just, it is socially acceptable, and it's a nightmare for our waterways. So that's what I've got to say about Mr. Trash Wheel and how we track. If you go to mrtrashwheel.com, you can actually look at our data sets. We have every dumpster we've ever pulled out of the harbor available as a Google sheet, and you can see an estimate. And you can also, our methodology is written there too. You can see an estimate for how much trash and what types of trash were in every single dumpster we've ever collected. And that data set's actually been used by researchers around the world to look at the impacts and understand the impacts of plastics in our oceans and in our waterways. So thank you very much for having me today. And you know, maybe at the end of this, I'm around to answer any questions people have. But thank you.
Thank you, Willow, and thank you to the Public Health Law Center for allowing us to have this conversation with all of you. I think you've seen from the last three presenters really what the case is all about in many ways. And one other thing I learned the first time I saw that presentation by Adam is that every city in America needs a trash wheel, maybe a whole trash wheel family. They're remarkable devices. With me, of course, is Zach Howerton. Zach is a partner at Milberg. I'm of counsel at Milberg. And Baltimore City has the representation of three internationally strong law firms, the Milberg firm itself, Napoli Shkolnik, and Cantor and Whiteley. So those are the three firms that are representing the city, and of course the litigation has presently been filed and is ongoing, and Zach will talk a little bit more about the case itself. When this idea first came to me, I was quite surprised. Actually, what happened was managing partner of Milberg, Mark Grossman, came to me one afternoon years ago and said, how about the idea of suing the cigarette companies for their cigarette waste? It was a novel idea to me. I never thought about it, never heard about it. But I talked to Zach and we came up with the idea that we should research this, figure out if there is a good claim, and determine whether or not, frankly, we could be helped by the trash wheel in Baltimore, which of course is quite famous. We did take a look at it, and we took it to Baltimore City to ask them if they would be interested in pursuing this claim. And we were fortunate enough to meet and talk with Sarah Gross, who is the lawyer who represents the city for what's called positive litigation. And this is certainly positive litigation, pursuing the costs that Baltimore City has to go through every year to pick up this litter. We also talked to other individuals, of course, about the case and decided ultimately to present the case. And it is now been filed in Baltimore City, and we'll be talking about the proceedings in a short while. But first, I want to talk about what is the case, excuse me, what is the case all about? Let's compare it to traditional tobacco litigation, and I think that's the best way to figure this out. Traditional tobacco litigation is focused on disease, addiction, medical costs, and personal injury. But this case completely different. Go to the next slide, please. Environmental contamination, municipal cleanup costs, waste management burdens for cities in America. So you see a complete and utter distinction between these two types of litigation, and that's important as we go on and discuss the case. Okay. We've already seen some of this and heard some of this from the gentleman who spoke before. Obviously, it's the most littered item in the world. It's made primarily of plastic, cellulose acetate. It's not biodegradable. It's toxic to the environment, and it's costly for municipalities to manage and eradicate. It is cost many, many cities, as you can imagine, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars to take care of this tobacco waste product. Cities bear the cost of street cleaning, storm drain maintenance, beach and park cleanup, water filtration, and disposal. Remember, most of this goes, these materials go into landfills, for example, where they present other problems, of course, that you have to deal with concerning the environment. All right, let me pass it on to Zach. Zach, tell us about the case.
Yeah, thank you, Roy. Yeah, as Roy mentioned, I'm a partner at Milberg. I've been involved in the case from the beginning. I'll structure my remarks in three parts. First, what the lawsuit is about and why it was filed. Second, the procedural history to date. And third, the current posture of the case. The nature of the case has been hit on a little bit already, but I'll go through kind of what the case is about. So Baltimore filed this lawsuit in November of 2022 in Maryland State Court, specifically Baltimore City Circuit Court, against the major cigarette manufacturers, including Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, and the Liggett Group, as well as a local distribution company that distributes defendants' cigarette products. The city's theory is centered on cigarette filters, which are made primarily of cellulose acetate, as you've heard. The theory is that they are not biodegradable, and once discarded, they break down into microplastics while leaching chemicals that were concentrated in the cigarette, including arsenic, lead, and nicotine, into the environment. These butts accumulate on city streets, sidewalks, parks, as well as in the city's storm drains and in the city's waterways, as you've heard from Adam. They create cleanup costs borne by the city and its taxpayers rather than by the companies who design, market, and profit from these products. The city's complaint asserts multiple legal theories under Maryland state law, including public nuisance, design defect, and failure to warn. The public nuisance count claims that the cigarette filters constitute an unreasonable interference with the public's right to a clean environment. The design defect count alleges that tobacco companies designed toxic non-biodegradable cigarette filters that these companies knew would be littered in the environment. Excuse me. The city's failure to warn count claims that tobacco companies failed to warn of this toxic non-biodegradable nuisance despite their internal knowledge. In essence, the city argues that the companies externalize the cost of these products, and the cost of cleaning up these products onto the city and its residents while continuing to profit from the filtered cigarettes. The city seeks to recover costs incurred for litter abatement, disposal, and environmental cleanup, as well as injunctive relief aimed at preventing the ongoing costs. I'm getting now into a little bit of the procedural history of the case. Shortly after the lawsuit was filed in Maryland State Court, the defendants removed the case to federal court. They argued that the city's claims were preempted by federal law, including federal statutes like the Tobacco Control Act. Baltimore, in response, sought remand, meaning that the city asked the federal court to send the case back to state court, where it was originally filed. The city argued that the claims were grounded in state law and the city's municipal authority, and therefore properly belonged in the Baltimore Circuit Court, where it was originally filed. In January 2024, the Maryland Federal District Court granted the city's motion to remand, returned the case back to Baltimore City State Court, The court rejected the defendant's arguments that federal jurisdiction was appropriate, concluding that the city pled exclusively state law claims that should be adjudicated in state court. And if you'll go to the next slide, please, for me. Once back in state court, the defendants moved to dismiss the city's complaint, raising a number of issues regarding the sufficiency of the city's allegations. The defendants argued that the claims were preempted or otherwise barred, that the responsibility for litter lies with individual smokers rather than the manufacturers. And they challenged the sufficiency of the city's allegations, the city's pleadings of its causes of action. In July of 2025, Baltimore City Circuit Court issued an opinion addressing the defendant's motions. The court found that the city's claims were not preempted or otherwise barred, and the city adequately pled its claims for public nuisance, design defect, and failure to warn. The ruling doesn't mean that the city wins. It means that the city now moves forward into the discovery phase of the litigation. So where does the case stand now? So at present, the lawsuit is continuing in Baltimore City Circuit Court following the motion to dismiss ruling. The parties are now in the discovery phase of the litigation, meaning both sides exchange documents and data and testimony that are relevant to, one, the city's allegations, and two, the defendant's defenses. Discovery in these cases involves millions of documents, witness depositions, and expert testimony. They can take considerable time. In this case, the current scheduling order allows for a period of 2 years for discovery to give the parties time to gain access to all the relevant information that are relevant to the city's allegations and the defendant's defenses before the case proceeds to dispositive motions and then trial. So in conclusion, really, Baltimore's lawsuit is centered on holding cigarette manufacturers accountable for the environmental and municipal harms associated with cigarette filtered waste. The litigation continues in Baltimore City Circuit Court, with discovery expected to last about 2 years. And I want to thank again the Public Law Health Center for hosting the discussion, and I'll send it back to Roy for now.
Thank you, Zach. Ladies and gentlemen, let me add, of course, thank you one more time for attending the webinar. I hope you found it interesting and that you'll hopefully contact Zach and I. We would love to hear from you about the webinar. You'll see Zach's email and my email address and our phone number there. And we would love to hear from you. If you have a criticism, of course, just send the email to Zach. If, however, you're going to say something nice about the program, please send it to both of us. Seriously, thank you very much for talking with us. And Willow, I think I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left. Thank you so much for that update, Roy and Zach. And the amazing work that you have done to get the case to this point. I think, judging by the explosive amount of emojis, the most popular panelist on this panel may be an inanimate object. So, Adam, if you could convey our thanks to Mr. Trashwheel in Baltimore, we would appreciate that. I also want to call out, we have some really important participants in the call as well. We have John Lavoie, Assistant Attorney General from Maryland, who leads the tobacco enforcement unit at the Office of the Attorney General in Maryland. And I just wanted to emphasize that as jurisdictions, if you're looking at this kind of litigation, if you're a city or county attorney, it's really important to also reach out to your state attorney general to understand, what implications state law and other settlements may have on your litigation. And I think that's a point that John really wanted to make as part of it. You're welcome to hop on if you can, John. I don't know if that's a possibility. In the meantime,
Willow, if I may just jump in for a second, that is extremely important. And we appreciate John making that suggestion and you making that comment. It is very important for everyone to understand that this is litigation in a single city in the state of Maryland. It is governed by those laws, obviously, and those ordinances in Baltimore City. In any other state, in any other city, could be completely different. And so, yes, we want you to take information from this webinar, and a lot of it has been provided, but it is not a situation where, the legal issues that Zach just discussed, let me limit it to that, would be the same in your state or city. So let me just say, go to lawyers, talk to them.
Sure. Thank you. I think you unmuted me. I take that as a cue, Willow. Is that what
We can hear you. Yes.
is that what
Yes,
I should
yeah.
do? Should I take that
Yes.
as my cue?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. I had a nice chance to talk with Roy today, and I've been talking to Roy and Zach a few times about this matter. And I hate cigarette butts as much as every other person. So I wish them success. I want to let you know there is an issue that Roy and Zach have worked very hard to avoid, and I credit them for that. There is a question that the tobacco companies have raised, and Zach, I believe, alluded to it at one point in his presentation, and it is whether the um, claims that were brought at this stage are included in the definition of claims that were released by the master settlement agreement. The trial court found that there is a provision of the master settlement agreement that says that the release applies to states and all its political subdivisions. Um, the trial court in Baltimore ruled that the state of Maryland did not have the legal power to release any claims on behalf of Baltimore City, and therefore Baltimore City is free to proceed. The reason why I'm here is that there is another provision of the master settlement agreement that says that the tobacco companies get a dollar for dollar offset against their master settlement agreement payments if a releasing party, a political subdivision, maintains a released claim, even if the state doesn't have the power to release it, which is that basically that their offset applies even if they get an order like the plaintiffs Baltimore City got in this case. The
John,
state of
I'm
Maryland
really
has
sorry to
intervened.
interrupt. We are at time. I'm
Oh,
sorry
sorry.
about that. Yes, I am sorry. But I do also want to just give a shout out to our Nicotine Waste Alliance. We normally have our meetings on the first Thursday of every month, and they gave up this time so that we could host this webinar. If you are interested in these issues and you want to learn more, feel free to email me at willow.anderson@mitchellhamlin.edu. We have a Nicotine Waste Alliance group that is really a brain trust of experts from all kinds of different professions and backgrounds to think about some of these issues in more depth. So I apologize for cutting you off, John, but we want to be true to the time of the webinar, and just thank you all very much for attending. We have a lot of questions in the chat that we didn't get to either, but maybe this is the beginning of a really important conversation. So thank you all
And I
very
just want
much
to
for
say I
tuning in.
support the litigation, and I'm happy to talk to anyone, anytime. Thank you very much.
As
Oh,
are,
thank you.
and Willow, of course, let me reiterate, please, if you're emailing us, Zach and I, please email us if you're interested in that issue, because we'd be happy to talk to you about it.